welcome to Audiobookish. This is an audiobook review and discussion podcast. My name is Fahed Rahman. I'm joined by Poppy Knight.
Hello.
And this is the third and final of our British Book Awards specials, and we're going to be discussing The Lord of the Rings by JRR Tolkien and The Sandman Act 2 by Neil Gaiman. We're going to be starting off with The Lord of the Rings. Poppy, do you want to read out the blurb for that?
Yes, so. These brand new, unabridged audiobooks of J.R.R. Tolkien's epic adventure, The Lord of the Rings, are read by the BAFTA award-winning actor, director, and author Andy Serkis. Sauron, the Dark Lord, has gathered to him all the rings of power, the means by which he intends to rule Middle-earth. All he lacks in his plans for dominion is the One Ring, the ring that rules them all, which has fallen into the hands of the hobbit Bilbo Baggins. In a sleepy village in the Shire, young Frodo Baggins finds himself faced with an immense task as his elderly cousin Bilbo entrusts the ring to his care. Frodo must leave his home and make a perilous journey across Middle-earth to the cracks of doom, there to destroy the ring and foil the Dark Lord in his evil purpose.
And I'll read out J.R.R. Tolkien's bio. John Ronald Reuel Tolkien, 1892 to 1973, a writer, artist, scholar, linguist. Known to millions around the world as the author of The Lord of the Rings, Tolkien spent most of his life at the University of Oxford, where he was a distinguished academic in the fields of Old and Middle English and Old Norse. His creativity, confined to his spare time, found its outlet in fantasy works, stories for children, poetry, illustration, and invented languages and alphabets. And so the books nominated in the Audiobook Fiction of the Year category are The Lord of the Rings, but we only had time to review the Fellowship of the Ring, so that's the book that we're going to be talking about today. And Poppy did mention this version of the book is narrated by Andy Serkis. So do you want to kind of start off with your initial thoughts on this, Poppy?
Yeah, sure. So I'd actually started very slowly reading Fellowship of the Ring anyway when we got this incredible opportunity. So I actually have sort of shifted a little bit by about 12 hours maybe of what I've listened to, because I'd already read the first half-ish of the first book, and then I switched to the audiobook, and then I've listened to a good amount of the second one as well. So it was really interesting doing that switch, going from the voice in my head that was, translating those words on the page to the amazing Andy Serkis reading them to me. But it was a really nice, smooth transition. Not in any way because the voice in my head was so good, but because the audio was so good. I really, really enjoyed it. Certainly from my perspective, this is going to be a very positive review all round. I thought it was great. I am still listening to the rest of them. I will keep listening. I'm sure I will re-listen again in the future. Really, really fabulous. It's so great to have these out in unabridged audio now. I think it's just so great that is an option when it's been so difficult before. I remember when I was looking a few years ago for an audio version of The Hobbit, was really struggling. And I believe this was where kind of this project began from, was Andy reading that out. So, yeah. First impressions are, I think it was fab. So I hope you agree.
Yes, this is a bit of a weird one for me, because this is a book I initially read back when I was like maybe 13, 14 years old. And like when you reread a book after that period of time, there's certain things that you forget and then you remember and then you get reintroduced to. So like there's certain sections in this book that were surprising and sometimes pleasant surprise, sometimes like a weird surprise as well. And because the movies are so prevalent in popular culture, that kind of also colours your impression of
course,
like certain artistic decisions that a narrator is going to make, and kind of it colours that one way or the other. And kind of Andy Serkis is always going to be associated with this series, so that's the other kind of concern I had going in, kind of what decisions he was going to make about that. And mostly, I think they were quite positive. Artistic decisions. There was a few things that I had minor quibbling issues with, but it's kind of one of those things kind of where your personal relationship with the text kind of colors a new version when it comes out and stuff like that. So
definitely. I think that's something where this obviously has the upper hand on a lot of adaptations, because as you say, the films are so prevalent. And certainly, as far as I understand, largely really quite praised, which again is rare for, book to movie adaptations. And obviously, by having Andy in there, that's got that tied to the film, for obviously, voicing certain characters, but then also just having, worked with the actors that did the other voices and being involved in the creation of that film and all of that is certainly, going to tie it to that, for better or for worse, I mean, especially, we've got to say, his Sean Bean impression was incredible. They could have had a stand-in second narrator for that part, potentially. So, and that's, I imagine, very definitely because we want this to sound like what a lot of people will hear. And because they'll think back to the films and stuff like that. So what pros and cons did you have on it?
So so generally speaking, I think the pros, I think Andy's got a really beautiful narrative voice. He's kind of there's I don't know how to, I'm struggling to find the right word for it, but there's kind of like this rumble at the back of his throat. That's really pleasant, and I don't know if there's an English word for that, but it's kind of very engaging, very soothing. It's kind of, it's, I could listen to him kind of and this is a long old book, kind of Fellowship of the Ring is 22 hours long, so it's a bit of a beast to kind of and
then when you put the whole series together, it's a long time. But I completely agree, and just that low kind of bassy voice is, like you say, just in general really lovely and soothing, but also I think it really suits the genre.
Yes.
I really think it suits the fact that this is a fantasy epic. It just seems like the right voice for that,
Yeah. And I quite enjoyed most of the character voice choices that he made. And it does maybe kind of wonder, kind of obviously with the films and his associated with the films, how much of those choices were influenced by being involved in the movies, because I think certain hobbits had Scottish accents, because I think maybe the actors playing them were Scottish or whatever, and stuff like that. The one area I did think he not necessarily struggled with, but wasn't perhaps as strong as the rest of his narration, was some of the female voices that he did.
Okay.
They sounded a little bit sameish to me.
Right.
But then that might just be a byproduct of the writing, that a lot of Tolkien's female characters are samey anyway, so it's kind of how do you add weight and colour to that, where I don't want to say two-dimensional, because Galadriel is not a two-dimensional character, but do you know what I mean? So
I do, It didn't necessarily flag to me, it wasn't something that I'd noted down, but I certainly can see where you're coming from, I think. Now you say it.
So let's talk a little bit about the story. I think many people are going to be kind of familiar with it from the movies, but the book is very different to the movies, and kind of people's, certainly my memory, and I had read the book, and one of my favourite movies growing up was the animated version of The Lord of the Rings by Bakshi, and then kind of obviously the movies came out as well, and obviously when you're adapting something, certain things need to be taken out and certain things need to be added in there, but so let's talk a little bit about the story. And this is a book and a series of books that have people study their PhDs on this. So this is just kind of two very much kind of lay people approaching the subject. So please don't kind of attack us for anything we say in this. So what was your kind of impression of the story overall? How did it kind of hold up to you? What you anticipated from it?
Okay, so yes, thank you for saying that about not holding us to too much, because I am nervous about talking about this from so much a story perspective, because obviously, and I'm sure we will talk even more about how good the audio was, and this being up for Audiobook of the Year prize, and it, unlike the Richard Osman that we talked about, which is actually up for the Crime Book of the Year, either in its print or in whatever format kind of category. This is obviously all focusing on the audio, and so that is really exciting. And yes, I am nervous talking about the story, because I know that I don't know it as well as so many people. In comparison, I don't know it at all, and may as well have not listened, kind of thing. So yes, please do take that into account. But I really, really liked it. It's obviously one of those things that is so popular and so many people love it. And the people that don't are equally quite strong in their opinion of, no, I don't don't like it. So finding where you sit in that, I kind of had heard both sides of it, but always liked the idea and always thought that I would love it, and enjoyed it. I do think it's really good. I like the whole world that's created is fantastic, and all the characters so well fleshed out. I think I really enjoy the pacing of it, which I know is a lot of people's criticism of kind of how long the journey takes and that sort of stuff. But I think it's great. I think it has a great mix of excitement and mystery and just good storytelling. I could tell the influence from ancient epics. You know, you can obviously tell that's part of Tolkien's education and stories that he loved. And I really liked that. It really is that sort of modern epic of that thing. It has so many of those same tropes. It writes things in the same way, even just the way it talks about landscape and talks about people, and the way it sits them all down in a room and they're all telling stories. And that's how you learn about the people of this place and that sort of stuff. I think it's great.
Yeah. So this is a far weirder and stranger book than I initially remembered it. There's kind of like a lot of like odd things in the book, and it's far more musical than I remember it being. I mean, there's like song plays a huge part throughout the story, both in terms of how people relate to the past and kind of events in the past, and how that forms a link to their present and what they hope to achieve in the future. And there's some really kind of weird section, like Tom Bombadil, for example, is this character that doesn't really feature in any of the film adaptations, and he plays huge part, huge role in this book. And the central mystery, kind of not central, but the mystery about like what Tom Bombadil is, and kind of it really sets in place that the fact that this is a strange world full of strange things that are unexplainable and dangerous and powerful. And you know this idea of these hobbits going out from this supposedly safe place into this wide world where they're tiny, they're small, everything presents a danger to them in one way or the other, and they're reliant on the kindness of strangers and at the whim of kind of these terrible dark forces and malevolent creatures as well. So that is one thing that really struck me with the book. The other thing was kind of how old-fashioned it was. Kind of when you read a lot of like modern fantasy, it's kind of the expectation is that there is going to be a far more diverse cast of character in terms of like the number of women involved, kind of like different races and stuff. And I don't want to kind of get into the discussion about, you know, orcs being evil and that having certain kind of like problematic aspects to it. But yeah, that's kind of how old-fashioned it was. But really, the weirdness of the story was something that was like pleasantly surprising to me.
No, that's fair. And it's sort of, this is potentially a bit of a tangent, but it's a good time as any to bring it up. I always find in things like that, for me personally, this is very much an individual's perspective, that I never seem to mind that much about, you know, a central group of characters being kind of all male. Yeah. Because I can still, you know, in that sense of being pulled into the story, still feel like one of the gang. Yeah. And oddly, I feel a lot less alienated by that than by sometimes when a female character is brought in, if it's done badly. Yeah. And even to be fair, when it's not, because when they are brought in, gender then becomes a thing. Yeah. You know, I think that's the thing. When I'm not saying everything should be all male, that's the way it is, but my personal experience often when I'm reading or watching things or listening is that a full male cast, when you don't have anything about gender in it, feels like so much more of a safe space to be in, and where it's like, yeah, I could be on this adventure with them, and yeah, I could be doing this as well. But then as soon as there's a female in there, there's then questions about, well, what role do they play? What stuff do they do? Are they as strong? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I totally agree with you, and I do think that is, probably it's telling of the time, that he did say, no, there's going to be no women going on this journey, part of the Fellowship kind of thing. One example that I'll give, but I'll try and not stay too long off topic, is the later seasons of Red Dwarf.
Oh,
where they bring in the Kachansky that's played by a different actress, and I absolutely hate her. And the way that they treat her, she is an annoying woman.
Yeah.
And in all the kind of stereotypical ways that you can do it, of her being an annoying woman, and her womanness is very much played in it. And all the way up until she comes in, I feel like I'm one of the gang. I absolutely love it. And then she comes in and I suddenly feel like I'm not one of the gang anymore, you know? So yes, off topic.
Yeah, off topic.
But that kind of connected thing as well, yes, you can definitely make that argument of it lacking in sort of female protagonists and stuff like that. I personally found it fine. I was going on the journey with them as part of the crew. The Fellowship, the crew, the gang,
the lads,
and the lads, exactly. Anyway, that was what I thought on that. And then it was interesting how you brought up about the songs, because obviously that's somewhere where audio is a real pinch point.
Yeah, I couldn't escape it. Yeah,
that's true. Yeah, you couldn't gloss over. Listen to our previous episode for the reference on that. But certainly for me as well, with having read the first part of it and then listened, I, in a short space of time, had both experiences, of trying to read these verses, which is really difficult, when you kind of, okay, you can tell the meter because it's, it's written in that kind of verse and you've got that, but you've got no sort of like, tune to it, and sometimes you can catch yourself wrong on what the rhythm and the meter is supposed to be, and it can feel like a bit of a slog to read through those parts. I do understand where you come from that.
Yeah.
I personally felt then, when I switched to the audio, I absolutely loved it and had no qualms whatsoever. There was one in particular, I mean, I kept writing it down, I kept going, oh, and I love that one, and I love that one. But the one as they're leaving Lothlorien that's being sung was so genuinely beautiful. Like, I could feel it in my chest, that kind of
really
beautifulness of it. Yeah, it was honestly just phenomenal. And, I wouldn't get that from reading the words on the page. I wasn't even really listening to the words. It was that feeling. And this was, Andy doing a female voice singing, a female character at least, singing this, and it was just incredible. I felt really, really, really moved by it, and I felt moved by a lot of the other ones as well, and thought they were incredible. I couldn't find anywhere from a quick Google, and I'd be really, really interested to know how they kind of decided on all the tunes. Whose responsibility was that? If Andy came up with them himself, then oh my goodness, what the hell? And if not, just the fact that he learnt it from whoever did, whoever did teach him and or coach him in what those songs should be, what the tunes should be, what the rhythm should be. No matter who came up with it, the preparation that surely must have gone into that, or props if that was done on the fly, which I doubt, but you never know. It was just, I'd love to know how those bits came about, because I imagine that will be really difficult, but it's done so well. It makes it seem like it was easy, it makes it seem like he did just sit there in the recording studio and just sing them out, even though, reality checks in, you're like, I'm sure he can't have just done that, but they were fantastic. I personally thought they were incredible. And for a series like this, where, as you say, there are so many sections of verse, so many sections of song, having this here as an option, I think just, it gives it the massive upper hand. It's like, why would you not want to listen to this version if you get the opportunity to?
Yeah, I'm kind of just adding to that a little bit. I think there's this old cliche, it's the singer, not the song. And I think he does like such a superb job of kind of like breathing life and it's an odd phrase to use, but sentiment into these kind of like songs. And by sentiment, kind of like, there's that kind of that bathhouse song that they've got earlier on in the book, and then he's able to change kind of like tenor into more kind of melancholic songs, and like
such range.
Yeah, like Tom Bombadil's kind of like, he speaks, I think, almost exclusively in kind of like this weird booming sing-song voice as well. So kind of there's that.
It's also interesting to note on that as well. So if you haven't listened, you won't know, but this is done without any backing music. It is all his voice, but you don't feel you're missing it. Even when the narration says, there was a guitar playing in the background or whatever, you don't feel like you're not hearing it properly to not have that. I think it's perfect as pure as it is, and sort of as a contrast to there was a once that we talked about last time, how I was saying how much I thought the backing music really elevated it. I really liked in this one how it was just his voice, but his voice was just absolutely perfect for it. And obviously that works for times when they're kind of all sat around or walking or whatever, and there aren't instruments, so it suits there. And there's no sound effects throughout at all either, really. And again, I think that works. I think that is a good style choice. You could very easily sound effect it, and I'm sure someone could do it incredibly well and have a kind of movie-like experience with it, but I liked it as it was. And I even thought that just with his voice, Andy did amazing sounds. Like he did like boom kind of mine's a very poor impression, which again, if you compare directly to The Wizards of Once, which did use sound effects for that sort of thing, his voice was better. It just was. And then a similar thing of like, you could say it's a sound effect, but it straddles between sound effect and narration, but the fact that he's done it bridges that gap of like coming out of the water post almost drowning, the actual like spluttering and spitting of water, which I imagine they must have had water in a glass to have done that, made it so real. I thought that was incredible. And then just the little things of like the narration said somewhere about there being a whistle in someone's dialogue, and he's managed to do that. He's managed to get a whistle into that sentence or whatever it was. It's just absolutely perfect in that kind of way of not making you in any way feel like you're missing any sound design, because he just did it all.
I mean, I've just got like a couple of more notes on this because I want to finish like the discussion like on Serkis's performance, but it was really refreshing coming back to this. I've talked a little bit about this before, kind of like your impression of the story and what the actual story is. And so in this version of the audiobook, there's like a preface section where JRR Tolkien kind of like addresses different theories and stuff like that. And it's fascinating with important fictional texts how much people bring their own baggage to it. And so definitely with this one, I think that's also the case as well. Kind of, you can kind of read in different analogies and stuff like that into there about kind of like nuclear weapons, the power of friendship and stuff like that. But I mean, just going back to the point you made earlier on, Tolkien writes fantastic, fully realized characters that are full of like weaknesses and strengths. And I really loved, the choices he made around Samwise Gamgee and Frodo, and their kind of like their relationship together is kind of like really lovely and a bit odd at the same time, because it's how different pairings and different characters kind of interact with each other as well is beautifully done.
I guess the modern sort of pop culture reference to that would be that Samwise is sort of the Charles Boyle of that relationship. From Brooklyn Nine-Nine, I think. That sort of comparison there. But no, I completely agree. And it was the one where I really wanted to love these because it ticks all the boxes of what I should really like, and I did. So
I have to say, I was genuinely stunned how good Andy's performance was. I mean, this is like a real powerhouse performance, and for me, I like to support like the underdog, the little guy, and I just thought, this is just kind of like, it's on the list because it's like a big title and it's narrated by kind of a fairly big name. Nah, dude, this fully deserves its place on the list. It's it's a top contender, and it's a top contender for very, very good reason. This is if you're interested in like fantasy or Lord of the Rings, or you're a fan of the movies, genuinely you should go out and get your hands on these audiobooks. They're the one that I've listened to, The Fellowship of the Ring, was absolutely superb.
Yeah, certainly. And, I believe it continues throughout. And I mean, you've got me, since we've, been doing this podcast, got me into bad habits of being able to listen to audio sped up. To try and, especially, it's come in handy when we've been rushing to get episodes done. But these I refused. I, despite how long it was and how it would be nice to get through more of it in the shorter time, no, because Andy's pacing is just absolutely perfect, and it deserved every millisecond to be properly savoured. It was so good. And I thought, especially because it's such dense language, and hugely long sentences with, no idea when the end of the sentence is going to come, and I thought he did a pretty good job of getting that intonation right, so that, each sentence sounded like a sentence. It wasn't like, oh crap, there's another another clause on the end that I forgot, and my intonation's a bit wrong and stuff, which is fantastic. I thought he brought some real humour to a lot of what he did as well. There was one I wrote down here. If you want to go check it out, it's just after about 14 hours in of Fellowship of the Ring, because I listened to it a while ago, so I can't remember exactly how he did it, but it was something like many words and few to the point, just it wasn't quite like that the way he did it, but the way he did it as sort of an aside, added some real humour that you wouldn't necessarily get from reading from the page. Yes, it's still making a bit of a sly comment with few of them into the point, but the way that it's said in that performance is just so good. I had some other notes here. It's just fantastic, perfect tone. Oh yeah, this was the thing, like when it gets dangerous and tense, and he talks like it's dangerous and tense, and then it gets a bit calmer, and you think it's going to be okay. And that was just really perfectly done, how he matched the way he was narrating to the emotion of the scenes. There's so many good things to say. It was really incredible.
When the characters are tired, he kind of like manages to bring that across when they see something wonderful or stunning or scary. He also so it's a really superb performance, really good. So I think that's a firm recommendation from both of us. And
for sure.
It's going to be, there's some really, we'll maybe do a little discussion at the end, kind of which book we think should win, but this book really put the cat amongst the pigeons for me, as did the next book. Should we talk about the Sandman Volume 2?
Yes.
Poppy, do you want to read out the blurb for that?
Okay, so enter the dreaming again as the blockbuster audio adaptation of the greatest epic in the history of comic books continues in The Sandman Act 2. James McAvoy returns to voice Morpheus, the Lord of Dreams, in this sequel to the #1 New York Times audio bestseller. Journey into a world of myths, imagination and terror based on the best-selling DC comic books and graphic novels written by Neil Gaiman, returning as the narrator, and lose yourself in another groundbreaking, immersive drama adapted and directed by the award-winning audio master Dirk Maggs. In the absolutely packed Act 2, the dark fantasy resumes and the Sandman expands into the French Revolution, ancient Rome, 19th century San Francisco, 8th century Baghdad and beyond. New and familiar characters abound, voiced by a bright mix of performers, including Kat Dennings, Regé-Jean Page, Emma Corrin, Michael Sheen, Kristen Schaal, Brian Cox, John Lithgow, Jeffrey White, and so many more, including fan-favourite narrators Simon Vance and Ray Porter. Just close your eyes and listen again as the greatest epic continues. Act 2 of the audio series The Sandman adapts collected volumes 4, Season of Mists, and 5, A Game of You, of the comics in their entirety, and most of volume 6, Fables and Reflections.
And I will read out Neil Gaiman's bio. Neil Gaiman is the New York Times bestselling author and creator of books, graphic novels, short stories, films, and television for all ages, including Norse mythology, Neverwhere, Coraline, The Graveyard Book, The Ocean at the End of the Lane, The View from the Cheap Seats, and the Sandman comic book series published by DC. His fiction has received Newbery, Carnegie, Hugo, Nebula, World Fantasy, and Will Eisner Awards. Gaiman was the writer and showrunner for the Emmy-nominated miniseries adaptation of Good Omens, based on the book that he co-authored with Sir Terry Pratchett. His novel American Gods has also been adapted to a critically acclaimed Emmy-nominated TV series. His audiobooks have won 5 audio awards and frequently appear in the New York Times audio bestseller list. In 2017, he became a Goodwill Ambassador for the UNHCR and the UN Refugee Agency. And this was adapted by Dirk Maggs as well. So I've got quite a long history with this book. So as some of our listeners may or may not be aware, I've got another podcast called See Through Panel where I review graphic novels and comic books. I write comic books myself, and the Sandman series is genuinely one of the most important graphic novel comic book series in the English language. So, and there's a new Netflix adaptation coming out this year as well. So let me get your opinion on it first, because I've got quite a lot to say about it. Yeah.
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
So I was so excited to listen to this. It's been on my list for a while that I've really, really wanted to. Because it's obviously heralded as being amazing for audioness. The fact that it is this proper adaptation of a, visual art form was really exciting to me anyway. And of course, it being Neil Gaiman. And I do really like Neil Gaiman's books, but sort of on a slight, comparison with the Lord of the Rings ones, where, it's the kind of thing where it ticked all the boxes for me, so I was hoping I'd love it, and I did. Neil Gaiman, I always find, he ticks all the boxes for me, and I really want to absolutely love everything he does. And for some reason, I just don't love it as much as I want to,
Yeah.
I do really, really like Neil Gaiman's stuff. I liked American Gods. I liked Good Omens, Terry Pratchett, but just something, for some reason, I don't know, and it kind of makes me a little bit sad. I wish I loved Neil Gaiman's stuff more, and like that some of my family do, and obviously people that I see on the internet absolutely love, and I'm like, I really want to love it that much.
Yeah.
But I do certainly really, really like it. Thought it was fab. I really enjoyed this. I have not read the comics before. I was going in completely fresh, so I made sure to listen to the first one, partly because I wanted to anyway, and I'm really glad. If anyone's listening and you've not listened to the first one, but obviously this one's, nominated and newer, don't skip to the second one. Listen to the first one first, or at least read the comics of the first one first, because you will be completely lost, I think. Again, comparison to Wizards of Once, where I thought I did, a great recap. You could jump in at that one if you wanted to. Please don't jump in at Act 2 for this. You do really need the context and the characters of what's come before, I personally think. But if you've got that, it is fab. I actually, in some ways, preferred the first one a little bit more to the second one. I think just because it's has more of a
narrative tighter.
Exactly.
I think. Yeah.
It had more of a linear story. It sort of kept me in it, whereas this one is a lot more episodic, which I enjoy. And I did find it good, but it was slightly more difficult to follow, slightly more difficult to get into. And especially, I think, because I was listening to it, all at once in preparation for this, as opposed to dipping into an episode at a time and going back to the world. For some reason, I did prefer the first bit more. But this is, again, just like with the really, really like and the love bit, it's a fine line. I thought this was really good. And I mean, when we get onto the audio, wow.
Yeah.
So what's your thoughts? What's your backstory?
So I think, again, it's when you've read a book in your head or read a comic book series in your head, and you've got a certain idea of how certain characters are going to sound.
Yeah.
I didn't have like James McAvoy's performance in my head. And don't get me wrong, James McAvoy's performance is really good, superb.
Yeah.
In my head, Sandman had a more ethereal, floating quality to his voice, and his one is very much more detached, stuffy, upper crust voice. And I found it was really interesting that Morpheus has a very strong kind of English accent to me, and the other people in his family have very much American accents to my ear. So that's kind of like, that separates him from the rest of the family, or certainly marks him out as different to them as well. But yeah, that's kind of like one thing that I had to it took me a little bit of time to kind of get used to that. It's kind of, that's not the voice that I had in my head, but okay, fine.
Yeah.
But his performance was very, very good. But that is kind of like one of the things. And again, kind of my memories of the stories is very different to what's the actual stories in this. And I think this is stories rather than story, because there are some episodes where Morpheus features quite heavily, and there are others where he's very much a peripheral character. And that structure, I can imagine how that could be frustrating and challenging to kind of like get your hooks in, and how it could be very easy to get lost and get confused about what's happening there. But yeah.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I do think it's that kind of thing where if I were, choosing to read this purely for my leisure, I think I would have preferred, an episode at a time, and then I'd be like, oh, I feel like a bit of Sandman, and then go and listen to one. And then in that sense, that sort of section of stories, nature works really, really well, I think, and is really interesting. But then, so for me, as a recommendation, if you're thinking of how to listen, it's less of a binge one, I think, the second one. But then again, with all the different characters and remembering them all, kind of doing it all close together is also a good way to go. So obviously for James McAvoy, I didn't have any impression of Morpheus in my head to start with. Well, apart from, obviously, I imagine everyone will know, because it's seared into my brain, of the Audible advert that's on basically every YouTube video you ever try and watch, or every Twitch stream. It's just, have you heard the one about the immortal Lord of Dreams? So that was all I knew really about the story, is from that advert. So I didn't have an impression of Morpheus in my head, so I do very much now have that James McAvoy personality that he brings in his performance of it in my head for that story. And then similar to how I picked out those little bits of humour that Andy Serkis brought into his performance, there was some here where, perhaps you do get from the facial expressions of, say, the illustration in the comics or whatever. I don't know for a direct comparison. So it's possibly a translation of that rather than an addition where it was in Lord of the Rings. But some of his ways he said stuff was just genuinely really
dry.
funny. So that there was one that was, again, there's going to be bad impressions, but it was like, did you win, Lord? No. That made me laugh. And then there was like a really spooky modulated voice that was just like really evil, and then he goes, yes, very well. And it was really funny, that stark contrast, which I think is nice in this sort of book as well, which has some really gruesome, gross, disgusting things, and yet also a load of humour in it. It's that real weird mix of kind of maniacally dark sort of thing, which I think does really tie into the fact that, it's DC Comics, it's that kind of superhero-iness, and I did definitely get that superhero-iness of it, and especially in the audio as well. Depending on the sections, it really did differ between where you were, which characters you were with, and stuff like that, but some of it was very superhero-y, it's sort of the... My way of thinking of it was like, it was the audio equivalent of like really overly saturated colours. It's sort of how I felt about some of those sections that just really rings true for superhero for me. It made me think of the Gotham TV series, which I used to really love, and stuff like that. It has that tie, as well as also having a tie to fantasy epics. It bridged between those two quite different but connected genres. So
I think this is like, his writing is very much influenced by like classics and mythology, kind of that kind of runs. There is kind of a few things I need to kind of pick you up on what you've said there. So so technically it's published by DC, but there was a imprint of DC called Vertigo, and the Sandman books were initially published by them. And
cool.
So Vertigo didn't really do superhero comics. They kind of did weird, dark stories that were aimed at adults. But the interesting thing about the Sandman character is that it does play around with, especially in the first book, kind of like ideas of like what a superhero is, and kind of how that dream of power and stuff like that. So that kind of does come into it as well. But I think it's going to be interesting how they do this going forwards, because there's a lot that happens in this second volume that is really key to what happens in future in the future episodes. So it'd be really interesting going forwards to see what they do with it. And let's talk a little bit about kind of like the audio production for this, because this is a very different creature to Andy Serkis's. I was going to say Andy Serkis's Lord of the Rings, but whereas that is a very kind of like pure, really leaning on the power of Andy's voice. This is a throwing all the bells and whistles at it in terms of like sound design, music, sound effects, all that sort of stuff in there, and with
and
a
like
full
layered audio as well. Like you've got people talking in the background while you've got, you know, narration going on in front and all sorts of stuff like that. Yeah,
and kind of like a full cast. I mean, I mean, this is kind of it is like a movie production. The really
exactly.
big names that they've got on there.
And I mean, two of the people that are up for other books. So Andy Serkis is in there, and David Tennant is in there.
Yes, yeah. So it's kind of exactly.
So they got twice the chance of winning.
So I want to start off with kind of Neil Gaiman's narration. I felt he did like a fine job. I don't want to say he was like the weakest part of the story. He's kind of got like this sort of slightly sarcastic or sardonic kind of like tongue when he's narrating. That I don't want to say it was great, but it's kind of like it took me a little while to kind of get used to, and I thought it was kind of quite a brave decision for him to narrate those sections of the books, because I know a lot of authors wouldn't be comfortable doing that. So what were your kind of like impressions? And this is an audio book, it's not like a radio play because of Neil's narration of it. So yeah,
exactly. And I would be so interested to, you know, really delve into, you know, how much narration they felt they had to add when they were adapting it, you know, that was kind of, I guess, taking up some of the slack of what would be images and stuff like that. It will be really interesting because yes, it does have a significant amount of narration in there, but is also very dialogue led. It's a real mix of the two. And then Neil has a very distinctive voice and a very distinctive rhythm to the way that he speaks as well as just his voice being distinctive. And so I therefore really quite liked it because it was his head, it was his story that I was hearing, you know, so I really liked that. And I've also listened to a bit of his narration of Norse mythology. A book that he's done about Norse mythology that he also narrates the audiobook for. And so I was already, I guess, prepped for getting used to his narration because I got used to it listening to a good chunk of that. And so, I really liked it. And I think it did make me think about how this was, you know, his creation, and not in a bad way, but in a really sort of, you see the creative cogs turning sort of thing. We're being invited into his crazy, chaotic, dark and twisted world. I liked it. I thought it was good. And obviously you also have that kind of reassurance, should you want it, of this is how the creator wants it to be.
Yes.
You know, which is why a lot of people like authors narrating.
Yeah, I mean, he's got a pleasant voice. He has got a pleasant voice.
Yeah. And you do know that he's saying stuff the way he wants it to come across, you know?
I think we should give like a shout out to Dirk Maggs, because I think he's done a lot of this. We've previously reviewed one graphic novel that was adapted to audio. That was Slain. I can't remember the full title of it, but it's not an easy thing to do. Kind of taking that text and then kind of adapting it there. So he's done a superb job with this. And then I really love the music that they used to separate not only to separate the characters, but kind of like as a kind of background pieces in some of the chapters as well.
So definitely, completely agree. I mean, I love the kind of the theme music. Effectively, I thought was fantastic. I really, really enjoyed that. And I also, like the music that they use throughout it, the music that is sometimes in the background of songs. Again, you've got some amazing songs that get sung and that was so moving. Like there was a ghastly chorus or something near the end of this second act that, again, really, really moving singing. And then also just the way that music is used, as you sort of touched on, very much like a film. You know, it has a score, effectively. You know, the sort of potentially romantic moments have that sort of, you know, romantic music in the background, and, you know, more tense moments have more tense music in the background. But in that way that a good movie score does, where it's hard to notice it's even there. You know, you notice the effect that it has on you, but you don't go, oh, they've pressed play on the music there. You know, it just adds to atmosphere without you quite realising that that's what it's doing. Really, really clever. Absolutely. Yeah, phenomenal.
Yeah, and because it's a full cast audio, but which of the characters specifically stood out to you in terms of because there's a lot of actors in there. I mean, I would have to say I specifically enjoyed, because I'm big fans of them anyway, but I enjoyed Kristen Charles as Delirium.
Right.
Brian Cox, I think he was the Roman Emperor, and John Lithgow as the King of San Francisco. For me,
Fair.
those three performances specifically stood out to me from the audiobook. What about you? Was there anyone specific that kind of stood out?
I mean, all were fantastic.
Yeah.
And yeah, really, really phenomenal. I got very excited because there was the actor that plays Mickey Bricks from Hustle, which is one of my favorite programs ever.
Yeah.
I recognized his voice instantly and was like, oh my God, he's in it. So that was exciting. I thought he did good. I really quite liked Kat Dennings. So Kat Dennings plays Death, and that character of Death I thought she had a really great voice of. And there are so many different representations of death. There's the death in Good Omens, which is very, very different to Terry Pratchett's Discworld death, which is kind of my main the main one that pops into my head when I think of a personification of death. And you've got things like the Book Thief death. There are so many different characters of the Grim Reaper throughout various sort of things, and then especially there, within the same sort of realms of authors and worlds and stuff, having such different ideas. And this one that Kat Dennings plays is a very different kind of death to any of the others that I've come across before. And I really thought that she was cast very well. Obviously, I don't know from the source material, but from how I heard the words,
she did a very good job.
I felt she was cast really well for what the character, to me, seemed like they were written like, and then I think performed it really, really fantastically as well. I think she did great.
Yeah. So Gaiman's version of Death is kind of a really fascinating interpretation of that character. He has written like a Death standalone graphic novel, and if you're interested in checking out that character, it's definitely one that I would recommend you reading.
Oh, definitely then,
as well. What other notes have I got on this?
I had a little note, and I definitely don't want to finish on this one because it is slightly critical, and I would like to continue with other stuff. So Act 2, a large section of it very much focuses on the character of Wanda, who's a trans woman.
Yeah. And
I think it's very obvious that they are definitely making the point that, transphobia is not okay. And I certainly like that it does make that stance clear. Yeah. But it does that through you having to listen to a hell of a lot of dead naming, transphobic language, people's opinions on gender that are not welcoming to those kinds of ideas. And I found it really hard to listen to because it was quite relentless for I don't know how long, like an hour, good, 2 hours, probably longer than that. It was quite relentless of basically her whole identity being challenged, her having to keep fighting, her having to keep standing up for it, and family, friends, strangers, whatever. And I just feel like for trans people who are listening, it's not going to be a fun experience for them either. It wasn't a fun experience for me. I'm not trans, and I think if you have had to live through that, where you're always having to fight for your identity to be valid, to then hear all that for so long, despite the fact that you know that the creators behind it aren't agreeing with it, it's still not fun. It's still going to remind you of the times when, your family, your peers, strangers on the street, that evil voice inside your head have said similar things. And I just, it felt to me a lot more like the kind of, there's a lot of different comparisons, but one is sort of like kids' books that teach you to be nice to everyone in the class, even the sort of the outsiders in the class, because it's nice to be nice to people. But then as any outsiders reading those books, you're like, okay, but this isn't for me though, is it? It's you giving a moral to somebody else, but it's not you saying you are valued, you aren't an outsider, you're an insider, you are one of us. It felt to me a bit like that. And I saw from a article thing how they had taken a lot of care over what they did with Wanda's story and how they made sure everything was done with respect, and that Dirk Magg specifically, was very conscious of that. He'd said like that part was keeping me up at night, and that he was proud that both Wanda and Barbie in this version, as opposed to the graphic novels, the comics, are this quote here, much more forthright about how they stand up to bullying and abuse. And so, yes, that is definitely the overall thing, which is good. But yes, it felt to me a lot more like that whole thing about groups of people being included in stories, but they're only being included for their trauma and not their joy. And that was what I felt was a thing here.
I think that's a fair shout, actually. Yeah, I think that's a perfect way of putting it. Yeah.
Okay, I'm glad you think so.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was sort of how I felt about it. I think, and certainly when you're adapting something that's already there, there's only so much you can do with it. But I think, the barrage of horrible things was a bit like what I said about Careless, with hearing all those horrible things about abortion, which since we recorded that episode, in between recording and releasing it, obviously there was all the stuff in the US about Roe versus Wade. We brought it even further to the forefront. But yes, it was a similar sort of thing where I was sitting in it, hearing things that weren't nice.
Yeah.
And just that dampening the experience for me personally a little bit, and then also making me think of, that it might alienate a little bit trans listeners rather than them feeling like...
I mean, kind of... Maybe this is because I'm bringing a knowledge of like the graphic novels and storybooks, but certainly Desire is like quite clearly like queer character in the graphic novel. I don't know if that
I get you
came across in the audio at all, and their relationship with Morpheus is one of the most interesting parts of the entire Sandman kind of like saga. So like in this particular audiobook, there is kind of like, I don't want to say exploitative, but kind of there is kind of like that traumatic story that features a trans character, but there are kind of queer characters in the story that are given power and agency, and that sort of thing.
And there's some like same gender relationships in there and stuff like that. I think definitely there's a lot going on in that sort of thing. It was very definitely much. Certainly when you compare it to Act 1, Act 2 very much had this one storyline that definitely stands out.
Yeah, so I just want to talk a little bit about the structure of the audiobook. So I've not listened to Sandman Act 1, but the first part of the audiobook is very much a narrative where Morpheus is the main character and he's driving the story forward. After that, the rest of the sections of the book are very much, I would say Sandman is a peripheral character, and it's kind of about things that happen either within his domain or kind of on the periphery of his domain, and he acts as very much, I don't want to say like Deus Ex Machina, but kind of like this powerful force that influences smaller characters, but characters far less powerful than him. And how did you kind of like find that slightly disjointed nature of the story?
Yeah, like I say, I think it made me slightly prefer this less than the first one, which does have some of that. It really does cut away for quite a while to, in some ways you could say, a separate story, that is connected to it, but it has a more linear narrative throughout, whereas this was much more segmented. But I did like it. I liked that it was sort of Neil Gaiman playing around with these ideas.
Very much.
If you're in this world, if you're in this scenario, how might that connect to dream? How might that connect to dreaming? How might that connect to sleep? And just it felt very playful to me. It felt very much like a brainstorm kind of thing, especially because there was some kind of stuff that seeped in there that I could definitely click to American Gods, of like the same sorts of ideas, and it very much felt like we were in a melting pot of Neil's. I've had all these thoughts about, dreaming is such a fascinating thing in general, what your brain goes through when you're asleep, the fact that you can go through what you think is a completely sensical story, and then when you wake up you realize, well, that person turned into that person partway through and I just didn't realize. There's so much that is fascinating about dreams that I can totally understand why he took it as the nugget to start from, and then does a really great job of exploring different things. It is very interesting and takes some very dark turns at times. I think maybe sometimes it's difficult because I really like dark and gruesome stuff, but sometimes when it needs to serve a purpose for me, I think there was some times where I felt some of it was a bit gruesome for not much reason, just for the sense of how gruesome can we go, kind of trying out kind of thing.
Specifically in like the story featuring Wanda, there is like a really kind of disgusting kind of semi-autopsy scene in
Yeah.
there. It's kind of like, okay.
Weirdly,
yeah.
that one didn't bother me as much as some of the other parts.
Yeah, but
yeah, no, totally, I get you.
Yeah.
And to be fair, while we're on gruesome, before I forget though, one amazing example of like the sound effects and stuff is because there was like kind of worms, I think, or something eating the flesh of someone, and the noises in that was so great. I genuinely tensed when I was listening to it and like cringed and, like, you know, my arms moving around in it. Oh, that's gross, but in a super effective way. Definitely. So yeah, I thought those stories and things were really good. One thing I would say about them is, as you touched on, the fact that a lot of it comes from myth and legend and things, I would add on the same slight criticism that we had of Weird Gods when we reviewed that book, that it does, I think, expect you to already know quite a bit about kind of mythology, and certainly I think it would help if you did, and you might feel a little bit lost. Not that you can't enjoy it, because you can, but you kind of feel a little bit like there's other people who will get this more than me, that sort of thing, which is what we'd said about that other book a few episodes ago.
What I would say is Neil does go into kind of quite niche, obscure areas at some points. I mean, there's a section at the end of the book where he talks about like really obscure kind of like Jewish mythology, in terms of like the creation of Eve, which I didn't.
That was interesting to learn about. That's the thing, because there's some bits where you're not so much expected to know, but you get taught.
And I would say if you're not fully read up on kind of like Norse or Greek or different mythologies, this I think is slightly more palatable than the graphic novels, because I don't know, maybe there's just something to the quality of listening to these characters talk to each other rather than reading them on the page that kind of makes the story, like the emotional interactions, a little clearer, I think, in the audio than it is on the page, where I think you need to maybe work a little bit harder to understand how certain characters relate to each other within the framework of the mythology within which the story is taking place, if that sentence makes sense.
I think it does.
Of course, I think this was another very, very good audiobook, very different to the Fellowship of the Ring and the Lord of the Rings audiobooks.
I mean, it's so different to everything on this shortlist. You know, this is, like you say, it's the movie equivalent in audio. It is that completely immersive experience of everything that you can throw at it, which I think you'd really hope for in a graphic novel adaptation. You know, it's very similar to what Slain was like, but taken up a few notches. I think, and absolutely, phenomenal. I mean, we've talked about before how one of the reasons I got into audio and love it so much is because of the His Dark Materials ones, and they just had full cast, you know, and this has full cast plus all the sound and the music, plus we've got to credit the adaptation, as we already have done, really, that adaptation of, you know, adding in words where needed and making it a standalone thing, but obviously still connected to its source material and stuff. I think it was fantastic. And then especially the fact that, so when I was having a little snoop on Audible, I saw how like there's 6 different languages that this is in, and I'm pretty sure they're all like full cast and still all the sound. And I cannot imagine how much work has gone into that, and I think it's fantastic that it has, you know, that this is such an amazing and epic project, and I'm so glad that it's not just English speakers that get to enjoy it. You know, I'm glad that the effort was put in, because even more effort than any other thing where you translate it, because of, you know, how much work goes into just doing it in one language. The fact that that's been done for so many I'm really pleased to have seen that. It's really, really great. If you're interested in the Sandman in general, as I was, if you're interested in how audio can really be utilized in so many creative ways. You know, even if you're interested in film, I think you do well to listen to this, because everything apart from the camera angles is what you're going to learn from this sort of stuff. And, you know, the visual imagery, you're going to learn so much about everything else that goes into a film, I think, from this.
I completely concur with you. So I think that's kind of a firm recommendation from both of us, really. Should we have just like a quick chat about the shortlist?
Yeah, though of course, listeners, go back and listen to every one of these specials that we've done. It's really exciting that we get to be a partner with the British Book Awards, that we're supporting this category, Audiobook of the Year Fiction. We're really, really thrilled. if you have come to us through this, then welcome. And yeah, if you just caught this one, please go take a listen to the others. Let us know what you think, please. You know, if you've been listening along with the shortlist, did you agree with the stuff we said? Did you disagree? Whose team are you on regarding Careless? What are all your thoughts? We'd really love to hear from you. I'm sure Feb will say at the end, but our social medias or our email, please do get in touch. So, yeah.
Okay, so we've had Careless by Kirsty Capes as narrated by Amber Gadd. The Lord of the Rings by JRR Tolkien, narrated by Andy Serkis. The Man Who Died Twice by Richard Osman, narrated by Leslie Manville. The Night She Disappeared, that seemed like such a long time ago.
I know, doesn't it?
The Night She Disappeared by Lisa Jewell, as narrated by Joanna Froggatt. The Sandman Act 2 by Neil Gaiman and Dirk Maggs, as narrated by a full cast. And The Wizard of Once, Never and Forever by Cressida Cowell and narrated by David Tennant. So it's a lot more diverse of a shortlist than you might think looking at it, simply because all the stories are really quite different. I mean, we've got a couple of 3 fantasy books on there, and then 3 books that are more set in the real world. So initially, last time we did an episode, I said I think Careless is going to be my choice for the one that I would like to win, because I loved the story and I really enjoyed Amber's performance. But bloody Andy Serkis's performance, man.
Yeah.
Flipping heck. It's amazing.
Yeah.
But then again, you've got the Sandman and The Night She Disappeared, also 2 excellent books. So like between those 4, I don't know which one I'd want to win or which one should win. What are kind of your thoughts?
Yes, it's really tough. So difficult, isn't it, because of how diverse they are. And yeah, I really don't envy the judges having to make this call. And so the 2 that we've reviewed today are obviously very much in there because of their audio. You know, they're up for this Audiobook of the Year fiction because they've done something exciting with the audio, whether that's an incredible adaptation of a visual medium massively utilizes everything you can throw at the audio, to one where you have a narrator from the films melding the 2 of the books and the films together, as well as just being a phenomenal actor who breathes life into every word and, like I mentioned before, gives people an option to listen to these unabridged and not just, you know, it's available in audio, but it's an incredible experience to listen to these books. Yeah. Those 2 kind of, by virtue of what they are and the fact that they deliver on the promise, means that they're really, really high up for me there. And then The Night She Disappeared is one where it just really won me over. It really, really did. That's one where it isn't necessarily doing anything technically exciting. It is a book that was then made into an audiobook, as is becoming, thankfully, so much more prevalent. But it had an incredible narrator who did so much to just absolutely nail everything about it. And the text itself was fantastic. A slow burner as it was, it was then absolutely incredible. So I certainly wouldn't mind if that one managed to, outshine the ones with the head start of being just great in audio, because that is a fantastic audiobook in all, senses of the word. It doesn't have to do anything particularly, groundbreaking to have just been phenomenal. They're probably my 3 top picks. I did really like The Wizards of Once one as well. I don't know that it is my winner, but I loved it. I did think it was really, really good, and excited for the listening back to the whole series. It certainly deserves its place there. And we both, I think, felt that the Richard Osman was, probably not our front runner.
I think we both kind of had lukewarm reactions to. I think Leslie Manville did.
It's good, but it's not.
It's kind of like Leslie Manville did a good job, a very good job of narrating it, but I don't think we connected with the text the same way as we kind of connected with the text with either The Sandman, The Lord of the Rings,
and The
Night She Disappeared, and in my case, kind of Careless as well. So it's a really tough shortlist, very different very strong performances from those
Yes.
top 3, top 4 as well. So we'll be really looking forward to hearing or finding out who has won it.
Yep.
And yeah, guys, thank you to the people over at the Bookseller for giving us the opportunity to take part in this. Thank you so much for that. Please do, if you like listening to this, please continue to support us by leaving ratings and reviews on whatever platforms that you found us on. And if you could also donate in our tip jar, which is in our episode description as well. Again, if you want to get in touch, you can do that through social media at AudioBookishPod or by email through audiobookishpod@gmail.com. And if you've got any recommendations, or if you're an author or narrator that wants their book reviewed with us, yeah, just get in touch as well. Kind of any closing thoughts, Poppy?
My closing thoughts are, if you're listening to this on the day that we're releasing it, on the 23rd of May, then tune in at 7 o'clock for the actual British Book Awards. The virtual ceremony is going on. We will obviously be watching. Very excited. So yes, tune into that. And even if you are listening to this later, go and have a watch of the live stream, which won't be live anymore, but go have a watch of it. Go and see who won. Go and see who won all the other categories. There's some really exciting ones up there as well. Audiobook non-fiction as well is a category I'm really excited to see who wins. There's some fantastic books on there. One that my colleagues worked on, and others that I've listened to and really loved as well. So I'm super excited for that, as well as the other categories there. So yes, go and have a watch, enjoy, and then yeah, please come back and stick with us too.
Okay, thanks guys. See you later. Bye.
Thanks so much. Bye.